All right, so today we're going to try to piece together a case
Okay.
that kind of feels like a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing.
Right.
It's you hear about these spree shootings and they just,
Yeah.
you know, and this one particularly kind of got under my skin a little bit.
All right.
And yeah, so it's a series of shootings in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Okay.
And at first the police were totally stumped. They had no idea what was going on. And we're getting all of this information
Boy.
from a really fascinating true crime podcast
Okay.
called Anatomy of Murder. It's hosted by a former deputy sheriff and a former NYC homicide prosecutor.
Oh, wow.
So they're really walking us through, all
Yeah.
the steps of the investigation, the evidence, the whole
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah, this is going to be good.
yeah, it's wild. What's really interesting about this case is that there doesn't seem to be any connection between the victims.
Oh, wow.
And
Not truly random?
it seems totally random. And the main suspect is a cab driver, which also just adds
Oh, that's interesting.
this really strange element to the whole thing.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating about cases like this is that they really kind of throw a wrench
Yeah.
in the typical way that we try to solve crimes.
Right.
Usually, investigators are looking for those connections, like a motive, something that ties the victim and the perpetrator together.
Right. Absolutely.
But when you're dealing with seemingly random acts of violence,
Yeah.
it's like, where do you even begin? How do you find a motive when there doesn't seem to be one?
Exactly. And the podcast hosts, they lay out these three separate shootings, and they all happen within a 15-mile radius.
Okay.
But at first glance, they seem totally unconnected. The first one happened on December 4th, 2012.
Okay.
These two guys are leaving a bar,
Right.
and all of a sudden, shots are fired from a passing cab.
Oh, wow.
One of the guys, his name was Heinz, he gets hit in the leg, but luckily, he survives.
So right away, you've got a drive-by shooting in a very public place.
Yeah.
That's a pretty brazen act,
Mhm.
but it seems like there wasn't any specific target,
Right.
which is unusual.
It is.
It makes you wonder, what would drive someone to just fire into a crowd like that?
Right. I mean, was he just aiming to hurt someone?
I
Or,
think-
did he have
I
the
think-
intended target and just miss? I don't know.
Who knows?
Then, a few weeks later, on December 22nd, a
Okay.
young woman named Maria Grant
Okay.
is shot and killed while she's riding her bicycle.
Oh, my God.
And she was shot in the head.
That is just chilling. That detail really suggests a level of intent.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a random bullet. It feels much more deliberate.
Yeah, like they wanted to make sure she was dead.
Exactly.
And then the final incident happens on February 4th, 2013.
Okay.
A guy named Jonathan Overstreet is riding his bike,
Right.
and he gets shot.
Oh.
This time, though, there's a witness who sees a cab speeding away from the scene.
Uh-huh. So that cab becomes a potential link
Yes.
between at least two of these shootings.
Exactly.
That's a huge lead for investigators, especially in a case that seemed so random at first.
Right.
It starts to suggest that the perpetrator might be using their vehicle
Yeah.
as a tool.
Yeah, like a weapon almost.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and so, but the cab itself, it wasn't enough to solve the case.
Right.
It took a lot of detective work to track down the driver of that cab.
Yeah.
And his name was Rupert Hardy.
So now they've got a suspect.
Yeah.
But how do they prove that he's the one?
Yeah.
And why these victims? What's the motive?
Right. And when they bring Hardy in for questioning,
Yeah.
he tries to play the victim.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he claims that his cab was caught in the crossfire of a drive-by.
That's pretty clever.
I know.
Trying to shift the blame,
Right.
make himself look innocent.
Appear like he's a victim.
You see that sometimes.
Mm.
Suspects trying to muddy the waters, create doubt.
Yeah. Well, it worked for a while.
Really?
The police didn't have enough evidence to hold him, so they had to let him go.
Oh, man.
But I bet they were watching him like a hawk.
I'm sure they were. I mean, they must have felt so much pressure.
Right.
They think they've got their guy, but they need that rock-solid evidence to connect him to the crimes.
Yeah.
And there's always that fear that he might run,
Of course.
Especially since, from what I understand, he wasn't originally from Florida. I think he was from Jamaica.
He was. And then, everything changes. The ballistics tests come back. And guess what? Same gun.
Whoa. The smoking gun.
Uvalde shootings.
This is where forensic science really shines,
Yes.
For those who might not know, ballistics matching is all about comparing the unique markings that are left on bullets
Right, yeah.
and casings,
Yeah.
like a fingerprint for a gun.
Yeah.
And in this case, it directly connects Hardy to all three crime scenes.
And so armed with this new evidence,
Yeah.
they bring Hardy in for a second round of questioning. But here's where the case takes a really weird turn.
Oh.
Even when they confront him with the ballistics evidence,
Uh-huh.
Hardy still denies that he was involved.
What?
So they search his house,
Okay.
and they find a 9mm handgun,
Oh, wow.
passports, and a bunch of cash,
Passports and cash.
all hidden in a suitcase.
So it sounds like he was ready to make a run for it.
Well, that's what the police thought too.
Yeah.
And so, faced with all this evidence,
Yeah.
Hardy finally cracks. He confesses to the shootings.
Wow.
But, and this is where it gets really strange,
Yeah.
he claims he was just following orders.
Orders. From who?
Get this. He says he was receiving signals from Barack Obama and the Secret Service.
Hold on. He's saying the president was telling him to shoot people.
I'm not making this up.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what kind of motive is that? It's not revenge. It's not jealousy. It's like something completely different.
Right.
It's almost like something out of a movie.
I know. It's like a crazy conspiracy theory.
It is.
So was he delusional?
Yeah.
Or was this just some desperate attempt to avoid going to jail?
Yeah. I mean, was he actually having a psychotic break, or was this a really elaborate lie?
It makes you think about, like how we determine what's true and how mental health plays into all of this.
Absolutely.
And he didn't just say he was getting these signals. He went into all this detail about
Right.
how they dictated his actions.
Okay.
Like he said he was told exactly who to target
Oh, wow.
and how to kill them. It's creepy stuff.
That is really unsettling. Like
Yeah.
it almost makes you wonder
Yeah.
if maybe this was a way for him to distance himself from the horror of what he did,
Right.
Like he wasn't really in control. It was someone else's fault.
There's these signals.
Yeah. Or maybe it's a sign of something much darker, like
Right.
he's truly lost touch with reality.
And to make things even weirder, he even brings Michelle Obama
No way.
and the King of Africa into this whole conspiracy.
The King of Africa. Like, where is this going?
I know. It's like, how do you even begin to figure out if
Yeah.
someone is mentally competent to stand trial
Right.
when they're making claims like this?
Can someone who believes they're taking orders from the president
Right.
really understand the charges against them? Or even participate in their own defense?
And so 2 psychologists are brought in to evaluate Hardy.
Okay.
And based on what they found,
Yeah.
a judge in Palm Beach County ruled that he was incompetent to stand trial.
That's a huge decision.
Yeah.
It means that, at least for now, the court doesn't believe he's capable of understanding the legal process
Right.
or the consequences of what he did.
Right. But it doesn't mean he'll never face trial.
Right, exactly.
With treatment and medication, he could potentially regain competency.
Yeah.
And then they could try him later. But it just adds another layer of complexity
It really
to
does.
this already really confusing case.
Yeah, it's this delicate balance between
Yeah.
making sure that the victims get justice,
Right.
but also understanding that mental illness can play a huge role in someone's actions.
And then there are the families of the victims.
Oh, of course.
They're left trying to make sense of this
Yeah.
senseless violence.
Yeah.
And now they have to face the fact that the person who may be responsible for all of this pain
Right.
might never be held accountable.
It's just heartbreaking. Their pain is a real reminder that justice can be a long and complicated process.
It is, and it doesn't always feel like justice
It doesn't.
in the end.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine what they must be going through.
It is.
And like you were saying, this whole thing really brings up those big questions
that.
about how our justice system
Right.
deals with cases like this.
Yeah.
Where mental illness might be a factor.
It's a really tough situation.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, we want to hold people accountable for their actions,
Right.
but we also have to acknowledge that, mental illness can really
Yeah.
cloud someone's judgment,
Of course.
affect their decision making.
And in this case, it's like, how do we even know if he was telling the truth?
Exactly.
Was he really having some kind of psychotic break, or
Right.
was this all just an act?
It's a question that forensic psychologists
Yeah.
and psychiatrists deal with all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy one to answer.
Right.
There's no foolproof test to tell someone's really mentally ill or
Yeah.
if they're just pretending.
Right. Right.
It's called malingering.
Malingering.
Yeah, basically faking symptoms
Oh, okay.
to get what you want.
Oh, so it's like trying to read someone's mind,
Pretty much.
but with really high stakes.
It is. It requires a lot of digging,
Yeah.
looking into their path, their behavior,
Right.
trying to understand their psychology.
Right.
And even then, it's still a judgment call.
Yeah.
There's always some degree of uncertainty.
Right. And especially in this case because Hardy didn't have any history of mental illness.
Right. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah.
It's possible it just went undiagnosed.
Right. Or maybe he was really good at hiding it.
Exactly.
It is pretty wild, though, to think that someone could be, seemingly normal for so long.
Right.
And then just snap like that.
I know. It really challenges our assumptions about human behavior.
Yes, it does.
We like to think that we can, categorize people, understand their motivations, predict what they're going to do.
Yeah, like we have them all figured out.
Right. But sometimes people just don't fit into those neat little boxes we create.
No, they don't. And speaking of not fitting into boxes, the podcast hosts go into detail about Hardy's version of events.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's all really strange. Like, he gives very specific details.
Okay.
But it's all filtered through this lens of
getting instructions from the president.
It's like he's trying to convince himself that he wasn't in control.
I think so.
Yeah. It's a way to protect his ego.
Right.
It's easier to blame someone else
right.
than to accept responsibility for doing something so terrible.
Yeah. For example, he describes driving around in his cab.
Okay.
And then he says he gets this signal in his head.
A signal.
Yeah. To go to a certain location.
Okay.
And kill someone.
What?
And he actually drove for like 20 minutes.
Oh, my God.
To get to that spot. And when he saw a Maria Grant on her bike.
Yeah.
He didn't even hesitate.
Oh, wow.
He walked right up to her.
Oh, my God.
And shot her.
That's scary.
It's chilling.
That level of premeditation,
Right.
It's disturbing.
Yeah.
It suggests that he was following a plan, even if he thought the plan came from someone else.
Exactly. And the details he gives are just awful.
Yeah.
He talks about how she fell off her bike,
Uh-huh.
and then he shot her a couple more times.
Oh, and then he just got back in his cab and drove away.
It's like he doesn't even care.
Right.
Like there's no remorse,
Mm-hmm.
no emotional connection to what he did.
And he describes a similar experience with the first shooting, the one outside the bar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he says he was just sitting in his cab in a parking lot,
Yeah.
and one of the victims rode by on his bike,
Uh-huh.
and suddenly he gets this signal.
Another signal.
Yeah, like this voice in his head
Wow.
telling him to take that person out.
The language he uses is interesting.
It is.
Take that person out.
Yeah.
It's like he's dehumanizing the victim.
Exactly.
It's like something out of a video game.
Yeah, and he says that once he fires the shots and drives away, the signal goes away.
Huh. Like completing the task.
Right.
Silence the voices.
Right. So if we're trying to put together, a psychological profile of this guy, what do we have? Well, the podcast hosts tell us that he was a 31-year-old Jamaican immigrant, kind of a loner, kept to himself.
Right.
Even his own mother said that he didn't really have any friends.
Oh, wait.
Didn't date.
Pretty isolated.
Social isolation can be a real problem.
Right.
It can lead to some distorted thinking. People can lose touch with reality.
Yeah. But he had a steady job as a cab driver.
Oh, that's interesting.
And he was very organized, kept meticulous records of his fares.
It doesn't really fit the profile, does it?
Not really.
It's like he was able to maintain this facade of normalcy while something else was going on underneath.
Exactly. And get this. He had no criminal record.
No criminal record.
Nothing. Not even a history of violence.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of traffic tickets.
Which, for a cab driver, it's probably normal.
Pretty typical.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have this image of a seemingly average guy.
Yeah.
No history of violence, no history of mental illness.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, he goes on a shooting spree.
I know.
And then claims that the president told him to do it.
It just doesn't make sense.
It really doesn't. This case really shows how little we understand about human behavior.
It does.
We
Yes.
like to think there are reasons for why people do things.
Right.
But sometimes the truth is a lot more complicated.
It is, and a lot more unsettling.
It really is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those cases that you just can't shake, You keep thinking about it, trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
Did he really believe he was talking to the president, or was it all a lie?
Right. And that's what makes this case so fascinating, I think.
Yeah.
It really highlights the gray areas of mental health and how it intersects with the law.
Absolutely. Like, if Hardy genuinely thought he was getting these signals,
Yeah.
does that mean he couldn't tell right from wrong?
Right. Like, was he even in control of his own actions?
Right. And if he wasn't,
Yeah.
does that mean he shouldn't be punished in the traditional sense?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, like maybe instead of prison, he needs serious psychiatric help.
Yeah.
But then there's the other side of the coin. What if he was faking it?
Yeah, if he was just putting on an act to avoid responsibility,
Right.
that's a whole other issue.
It is. It's like, how can the justice system even function
Right.
if people can just pretend to be mentally ill to get out of trouble?
It's a real problem, and it makes these cases even more difficult to handle.
Absolutely. So how do we balance those two things,
Yeah.
How do we make sure that victims get justice while also recognizing that mental illness is a real thing?
It's a delicate balance,
Hmm.
and there's no easy answer.
Yeah, it makes me think about the Son of Sam case. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah, David Berkowitz, right.
Yeah, he claimed he was getting orders from a demon dog.
A demon dog.
I know, crazy, right?
That's wild.
And for a while, people actually believed him.
Really?
Yeah, but then it turned out he was making it all up.
Oh, so he was lying.
Yeah, he just wanted to avoid taking responsibility for his crimes.
So it makes you wonder, was Hardy doing the same thing?
It's possible. I mean, we may never know for sure.
Right.
But I think what this case shows us is that sometimes the truth is really hard to find.
It is.
And it makes you question, how much we really understand about human behavior and what drives people to do these terrible things.
It also makes you think about how we treat mental illness,
Yeah.
Do we punish people who are struggling, or do we try to help them?
It's a big question, and I don't think there's a simple answer.
There isn't. And I think these kinds of cases can help us have those difficult conversations.
I agree. Well, I think it's safe to say that we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
From seemingly random shootings to presidential conspiracies to questions about mental competency.
It's a case that really makes you think.
It does, and I think it reminds us that the human mind is a powerful and sometimes scary thing,
It is.
and that sometimes there are no easy answers.
Definitely not.
So to our listener, I hope this deep dive has given you something to think about.
Yeah, me too.
What makes someone snap?
Right.
How much control do we really have over our actions? Yeah.
And how do we find justice when the truth is so elusive?
Big questions.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for listening.